Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome to a messing around on a Friday afternoon. Unfortunately, I am traveling this Friday today at this time when you were supposed to be doing this. So my wife insisted on going on a trip someplace. Good to see one of her friends, and therefore I'm back. Therefore this is not live. Sorry, okay, but I've been good. I've been doing more lives than I was planning, but this is kind of going to be our, you know, fill in when I can't do a live. So let's turn to the questions of what we're going to do during these things. So we're in this week. If we go look at what we did, let's look at what happened this week in our videos. Well, we started on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We got to the first chapter, the introduction, the first chapter of Carl Schmitt's Legality and Legitimacy. And we got up to, I believe, on the 26th, on Wednesday, we got, I believe, chap. No, it can't be book 5. It's okay. There is a mistake on the screen. I need to fix it. It was 25. How did that go wrong? Book 25. And we're finishing up the part 4, I think, and that will bring us into the start of last 30. Was it 31? So yeah, we're getting into the last part 6. So this leads us to. Okay, that was a mistake. I don't know why they would say part 5 on the scanner, so I fixed that. Oops. And Carl Schmitt, we did up to things. So therefore, this will lead us. I'm currently on vacation, so I have pre-recorded stuff. I've pre-recorded to like the first week of maybe even to this August 7th. Videos for up to August 7th, so I'm pretty ahead. We have a week left of next week's videos on Schmitt done. Which we'll be doing 2 and 3, right? Chapters 2 and 3, legality and legitimacy. So that is what we've done so far. So we have a sense of what we're doing and what we're going to do, right? So that's what we did. So therefore, we'll be continuing. We'll be continuing looking at Schmitt on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we will be doing Montesquieu, finishing up, starting the end of Montesquieu. Honestly, for my own purposes, recording, I have 3 more episodes. You're going to be coming up sometime in, I think, the 27th episode, the episode for the. What is it? Yeah, that is the painful one. August 7th episode is going to be the painful one. Why? It's the Montesquieu one that goes 4 hours. Oh my God, why did you make it that long? Well, again, we're following the principle of one book, and this was the longest book of the Montesquieu, which deals with the book following the previous book, which dealt with the Roman, that one chapter part in Rome. This is again 6-part. 6-part is 5 books, and the middle book is a general book, which is very interesting. But all the other ones are very historical books. The first book, 27, I think. Book 27 deals with the Roman chapter. It's the famous Rome. It is on Roman law, which shapes inheritance laws, in particularly. That it's a 1-chapter book. Then there is 28, which deals with the French law and how the evolution of the laws of French through the Franks, how it happened, and how the interplay between Roman law and Germanic law created, and the way certain practices and institutions emerged in this combination of these two principles. And then not only the laws of the Franks, but all the roles of the Visigoths and then the Vandals, right? And how all these barbarian tribes bring in their simple laws, change the way, and then conquering Romans, and how these different the Franks, the Visigoths, and the Vandals all alter. Either they adapt to the dominant law of the region they're in, or they reshape it. So therefore, this, and then how different principles of certain aspects from, these things emerge, and therefore it's a very difficult book, and therefore this is why it leads us to this kind of question of, like, oh, that's rather long. Why don't you just make it shorter? Why don't you make it 2 videos? The problem with making 2 videos, as I said, we're trying to keep the principle of keeping each book, keeping the kind of integrity of the project, of therefore giving a video on each thing. So therefore someone could download the video. Now, of course, you can always download the video. You can either download it, if you have the capacity on your Google by itself, you can find a website that allows you to download it, right? That's the trick. And you can listen to it when you want to, in that sense. I think this is what is really useful about such a video, because I'm attempting to bring you through the book, book by book by book, and going through the book, reading it and explaining it and addressing it in a way that someone who's going to be reading the book may want to, read while they're doing it. So therefore, this is something you do. So I'm supposed to be talking about the things I've done over the week. Well, when I've done, first I'm on vacation, so that's the big problem, and therefore resting with my, kind of get some recovery from this. I did some editing. I'm teaching online in America, so I'm keeping my obligations that way, but I'm kind of not, but I'm reading still. I always read. One of the things I read was what's his name? Come on! I know the guy's name. He's famous. Come on! I talk about him all the time. I'm very influenced by him lately. David Starkey. David Starkey, in some of his talks, has been pointing out, this one of the Eliot poems on little gildings from one of her last poems, the Four Quartets. And I decided to get, I couldn't, I was my wife, so I had to go buy a new copy. So that was like, okay, a new copy. I had an old edition of it someplace at my library from undergraduate years. I mean, I took a course on Eliot poetry, modern poetry, both as an undergraduate and graduate. So I did, so I understood this. And Eliot is kind of the earlier Eliot more than later Eliot. I preferred the earlier to kind of angst when I was younger, the more angst-ridden Eliot than the later Eliot. Although I liked Ash Wednesday, and I liked some of his plays, the Four Quartets was kind of like, my more religious friends were really into it at the time. My Anglican and Catholic friends really liked it. I really didn't see it, and it was really Starkey who made me go again, read it, and see the value of it. Now, what I did to help me read it, I was here and I had time, so I listened to 2 versions of it while reading it. I read it 2 times. One was I listened to Jeremy both on YouTube. YouTube has these interesting things. You can maybe hear people's research. Now, I don't like some of the video poetry things. They put music with it. Like, well, come on, really? You don't need the music. I mean, I was at Ted Hiddleston's editions of some of these poems were like, pissed me off. I like Ted Hiddleston as an actor. I like his Coriolanus, and even his Loki is kind of fun. But with Coriolanus on the National Theater stage, which I saw at the movie theater originally and then found online, is great version of Coriolanus, modern version of Coriolanus that I think is worth Shakespeare's Coriolanus. That is compelling, and always thought he was a good actor, and I still think he's a good actor. But it's the but. In his poetry, reading was annoying. So Jeremy Irons was a good rendition, and I read the poem reading him. I'm listening to him while reading. It was great, and in fact, I would go back when I want to read a passage. I'd go back, hit the rewind button on the the minutes thing behind on the YouTube thing, and I would go through it and listen again while reading. And this way, it was good for, if you're being so long over in this part of Europe, my English has declined. I'm a native speaker of English, and people just say you always had a tentative relation with the English language, right? But being abroad, you lose your English. I'm sorry, you lose it. You lose it, particularly when not everyone not speaking it, not hearing it in the clear way, and using it as most Poles use their English. It's very limited and it's very awkward and it's simple, not construed in the same way. And the British friends I've had have kind of declined. And the American friends, again, there's so few of them, so you don't get the kind of dimension, and you don't get that much exposure to modern TV. You get this kind of modern movies too don't have the depth of the English, and you don't get to hear really Shakespeare. We know, of course, you watch a Shakespeare play or something like that, but that's a rare experience. And if you're not using it, you lose it. Right? That's the famous language, and I think that's important. So therefore, listening to Jeremy Irons, and then I've discovered. Al Guinness's rendering. And I fell in love, these two different renderings. It forced me even to Guinness's Wasteland, because the Wasteland is interesting. The Giddings doesn't have the same dimension of foreign language thrown into it that Wasteland does. And so back here, why was this line that even in the last of the quartet there, he had that line that Starkey quotes, and I underlined it when I was doing it. So, about, there was two. Yeah, this is the one. He says, we cannot, this is in the third section, the end stanzas of the third section. He goes, we cannot revise old factions, we cannot restore old policies, or follow an antiquated drum. These men and those who oppress them, and those who they oppose, accept the constitution of silence, and are folded into a single party. Whatever we inherit from the fortunate, we have taken from the defeated. What they had to leave us, a symbol perfected in death, and perfected in death. And this is the last stanza of the sentence. And shall all be well, and all manners of things shall be well, by the purification of the motive in the ground of our beseeching. Right, that ends that line there. But this is about the whole question. Ends up the area thing about history. Right, he's saying that history may be servitude, history may be freedom. See how they vanish. History may be servitude, history may be freedom. And I think Starkey, the historian, saw this and said, okay, there's something good here. And this line here about our who we are. This again, very the Burkean line that this is not a contract of the present, but a contract of the present past. A contract of the present with the past and towards the future, right? And Burke's delicious explanation of what society is and a people are, right? And that this idea that who we are is not only of the fact of the victors, but also of the defeated. And you can see this in English history too. Look at the Normans. The role the Normans played in shaping England. Also kept much of Anglo-Saxon culture. Even though they destroyed much of it, also destroyed its elites, but they kept what they thought best. Right? They kept from the Danelaw and also the Wessex, Anglo-Saxon, the Danelaw aspects of the writs and these principal aspects, but they got rid of the other aspects of the slavery, the class system of slaves and permanent people. This idea of only, they brought in a Roman law model, and that this merged into the common law practice, right? So again, this is, I think, why Starkey's right, that this is the great story, the victor and defect. And actually, this may be even why the current trend in America of whitewashing the past, of destroying the statues of the Confederate soldiers, even because given how moronic higher education has turned most of American generation millennials, and how the left wing to capture the academic establishments, particularly the elite ones, have produced nothing but morons. They see everything as, must be a white oppressor, even black, statues of people who were important for doing this. This is part of the BLM and trying to get this nonsense right. This is why Starkey is right about this. This is why I thought it was very good to look at this in that sense. This is what I was reading in that sense, and I had a line I would quote from, and we're going into this 16 minutes, so the last in part 5, he goes. This is that middle section right before the ending part. He goes. Where that line, I'll say this. Where is it? We, with the dying, we see they depart. We go with them. We are born with the dead. See they return and bring us with them, period. Now, the moment of the rose and the moment of the yew tree are of equal duration. So this idea of this seasons and time and the seasons of this thing, right? A people without history is not redeemed from time, for history is a pattern of timeless moments. So while the light falls on a winter's afternoon in the secluded chapel, history is now in England, right? That line. Right? This is how he ends it. History is now and history is England. I can see why Starkey saw this, and I think this was a very important poem to understand this. And I think this idea, one of the important aspects of this is the question of time. If you're, I know people doing the Milliman cast on Heidegger's being in time, and people say to me, why don't you do being in time? And I said, I'm a political scientist. I'm concerned with politics. I studied philosophy and I'm interested in it. But I didn't realize reading this is all about the question of time, the problem of the past, the problem of the present, the problem of eternity, and the problem of time is a moment within the thing. And this is something that actually even in our discussion of Kojève even sought this out, this problem of time, of the eternal versus the historical, right? This and why that division between the something that is eternal and present versus those that are kind of looking towards the future, looking towards the past. The father going to the past, the leader looking at the present. Futures are leader looking at the future. The father looking at the past, and the command or the master looking at the present, right? Whereas the judge is eternal, right? This is eternal aspect. There's no, it is always so, something like this. I think thinking about this, thinks of our question of time, leads us to, I think, something like looking at what Eliot tries here in the Four Quartets, and why it is kind of interesting for those who are interested in politics, because I think the concern of the question of the eternal, the now, this is the question of what we can accomplish in things, and the idea that we can get a turnout. The realm of the eternal is not a realm of action. The realm of eternal is timelessness. It is outside the scope of practice. This is why the level in the Greek concept, this is the difference between theoria, which is eternal, and praxis, which is coming to be and passing away, right? This is the scope of these things, and that the eternal is changeless. So therefore, a thing is true or not, and it always is true or not, right? Whereas in the Roman praxis, truth and falsehood is relative to the moment and the situation and the condition. And that is the problem of political reality, of understanding that the conditional aspects of truth and falsehood, and the situational aspect of this. And this is what, and I think maybe thinking about that, reflecting on that, and the tension between the eternal and the present is worth looking at. It's also religious in that sense, yes. And the question of the divine is always there, and we're confronted with it. And of course, mortal beings are, as beings towards death in Heidegger's language, always are confronted with the question of what is meaning, what is being, what does our life mean, and we can understand it in turn, and therefore transcendence is a way to allow us to understand ourselves in that sense. But enough, right? This is what I was reading. The other things I'm reading, and something I'll talk about, the other book I was reading is James Kelly Morningstar's Patton's Way, Radical Theory of War. Why? Because I've always been, this is from my long time ago and things like this. Always been a student of war. Clausewitz, you name it, I've read it in that sense. I remember even the famous Ludwig's back in the 80s, the Pentagon, the Out of War series, and his whole discussion of strategics. And I've always been interested in Roman history and that stuff, but also war history. I've studied, Kagan, not only Robert Kagan, but John Keegan, in his history of war, and that's why it led me originally to know Victor back in the late 80s, his early revolution on agrarian warfare, and about the role of warfare, the agriculture in the way of war in the Greeks, which led to the rewriting of a book called The Western Way of War, which I think is an essential book to understand these things. What is so great about this book is that this is kind of a deconstruction of the negative Patton myth of this basically put up by all Patton's enemies, by particularly Eisenhower, and found in the biographies of Montgomery, Eisenhower, and Bradley, particularly Bradley. And Bradley plays the role. I mean, we look at the movie, everyone loves the movie Patton with George C. Scott, but you have to remember that movie was shaped by Bradley. So the picture of Patton we get in there and the picture of Bradley we get in there is just a mythic construction of the Bradley view of how destructive Patton was. And while we can always admit Patton's flaws, we should understand that the Patton is often understood as is misperceived, and that one of the great tragedies of the Second World War, and what actually did it, was the fact that the mediocre was in charge of things, that Eisenhower prolonged the war. I think in many ways we can argue that Eisenhower made the war worse. Eisenhower in his conduction of a market, both of how he made decisions and how he didn't make decisions, not only is revealed in his commander of Shave. Everyone said, "Oh, that was a great thing." No, he was not a good commander. He was often kind of a coward. He was afraid to make decisions. He was always thinking of the worst situation. Maybe, of course, we can argue that may be what was that condition of necessary and of allies and necessary. But no, he often, and I think what Morningstar does is show the tension of the two schools of theory of how this idea of war as strategic battle, where we get a battle of decision destroying the enemy, versus therefore this idea of attrition, a war of decisive battle through attrition of forces, versus a war of strategy and maneuver. And we see something like this that play with Sun Tzu also. So this is back to my interesting why do you read Sun Tzu? Same reason why he's Machiavelli. This is about thinking about remember what Machiavelli says about prince. A prince should always think about war, about strategy, and about the question. And I think in many ways Sun Tzu is like this. And I think this is why looking at Patton in terms of a thinker, and a thinker who understood chaos in ways. In other words, he accepted chaos of the modern the war situation, and emphasized the necessary things of virtue. In other words, this idea of spirit, of discipline. You don't try to create order. You don't try to manage the situation to create order in the battlefield. That's impossible. Therefore, this idea we're going to make plans is the whole what the book calls the the Leavenworth School of the Infantry School, this idea of doctrine of the War College of the 1920s and 30s, of the damn thing versus the Germanic thinking of, what is that line? It's, I can never get the German right. Pardon me. Even though I can read German to some degree, I can never get my pronunciation sucks, right? Auftragstaktik, so, which is the mission tactic. The idea the Germans were better. The German military devolved decision to the squad leader in ways that the Americans did not, except for the infantry. The infantry, they allowed that, but for everything else could be planned and like this. And even only at the tactical level was that done. Well, the German kind of gave a better idea of that. In other words, you had it, and therefore this is Patton's understanding of things and the idea of radical war and thinking of decision and leadership. I think this is and therefore thinking of this as in terms of how leaders and decisions made. And I think what he describes here is this is why he looked in the ancient world, where prudence and judgment is about looking at the moment. Remember, prudence is always, in the Greek understanding of it, not this rational calculative construction that modern prudence by Hobbes will interpret, but rather prudence is really now the understanding in the moment of the chaos of crisis, the moment of this situation. What is the correct way? And that can only be understood in those actors in that moment. What is the right way to accomplish this? And therefore, you had to devolve decision making to the commander at the local area to take advantage of the situation, to decide what he could take advantage of and move to go this. And this set him goals. This is the idea. This is what he calls what is that line? The German for that is. It's literally in the translation of that term, mission tactics. You give them a mission, and therefore you give them a goal or a target or some set thing, and allow them to develop the situation. Because they're trained to understand this. In other words, you have to make your local people so well informed. And I think this is reading at this, you can see the mind. The Morningstar shows us the development of this in many stages. I'm halfway through the book, and it's still an outstanding book. And that's what I've been reading in that sense. We're still stuck on one. We're saying, well, we're taking a long time to do this video. Why? There's other things I've been reading. I'm preparing for my starting 2 weeks. I'm going to be doing a seminar with a bunch of people online on replays of Aristophanes, the frog, the birds, and the Archaeans, the Achaeans. I got this edition of frogs. This is Ian Johnson's translation, which is both Greek and verse, a new verse translation. I have the old lobe. I don't have the new lobe. I have the older. I discovered my lobe is too old. There's a newer lobe. The edition of the lobe has an improved translation in English and some corrections and restructuring of the book. I'm saying, I need to make that, just buy it, but it's expensive, and I'll maybe wait a week or two or make the new semester and wait for the new post-summer, maybe by then, or even after this thing, because the Aristophanes plays are fantastic in that regard. So I read the frogs. I read through the frogs, and it was very good. I was looking at the Greek and preparing the Greek and this, and you saw this, and I was reading two different translations, and I noticed the thing about this, so preparing for that. So the frogs. What's so great about the frogs is it's farcical at the beginning, and it gets serious about the question of why he's going to hell. Why is Dionysus? It's like Strauss said in his commentary on the frogs. It is the only play that we start the dialogue out with a god, right? The second, what is it? Dionysus is the first character we meet, and he has a slave working with him, as Zan. Xanthasius, Xanthea, and Dionysus. He says, look, master, the audience. An audience, shouldn't we say something like acknowledging a god, the slave of a god? And therefore, the whole point is this comic. It's a comic routine where the god is the slave, and the god decides how we're going to do it. They're going to go to hell. What is the purpose? Is going to they're going to have to go to hell or Hades to rescue. He's going there to rescue Euripides because Euripides just died, and he's going to go rescue Euripides and bring him back because he thinks Euripides is going to help. Try to do something in there, and he goes to who do we know that's alive still, fellow god Hercules, and he meets Hercules to understand how to get to hell, and he imitates Hercules to go down this whole series of the tricks of this is comic to a great degree, and the lying, and this really farcical. And the last part is he's at Pluto's gate. They're dealing with the question of there's a problem now because there's a debate. Pluto's thing is that only the best will get to sit with him at dinner, and therefore the fight who deserves the tragic chair to sit with him. And currently, it used to be held by Aeschylus. Now it's going to be Euripides, and there's a debate in hell, and most of the people in hell are the vulgar sort, and they want Euripides, and the noble people and noble minds prefer the aristocrats prefer Aeschylus. And there's this debate, and there's a trial, and Dionysus is called as judge, and it's a hilarious play, and it's worth reading and looking at, because I think it is both. It's an interesting question why the frogs, the famous this famous, in fact, there's a whole story about how colleges in the late 19th century and their sports teams uses as Yale used that line from the frogs as kind of their rally cheer, sports cheer. And then other teams devolved versions of that. So that's hilarious in that sense. You can see the playfulness and the character of it. But how it has a serious question about who has the best advice for, the comparison of the poetry and whose poetry is better, and the Steins weighing the poets and that in their lines and their strategy things, and how they're being said, and and throughout the thing, Euripides loses to Aeschylus, and therefore at the end of the day, Aeschylus is going to come back to the among the living to give good advice, right, to the city of Athens, how to survive the war. And instead of letting Euripides things, he says, Sophocles, why don't you? I only insist that Sophocles sits in my chair because he's really worth. So this is a kind of even deeper attack on Euripides in that sense. So again, that's my second read. The other reading I was doing. The third reading I got for the week, I'm going to kind of postpone to talk about one of the things up there. We did my video scheduling. My video schedule is like this. As I said, we did this much of it. It's going to continue. You're going to these couple more weeks. We're going to be continuing with the Schmidt and the Montesquieu. I have only, like I said, 3 more recordings from Montesquieu to do, and I have about, I think, through 1, 2, maybe 3 more of Schmidt, maybe 4 more Schmidt. The Schmidt next, I think I'm going to be doing, as I said, something, maybe I'll do something on political science, as I said, and writing. I might actually just do the writing on something separate. Who knows how I feel about that. I'm still working on, I have some things. I might, the Schmidt thing, I might turn to Schmidt's constitutional theory. I still think I'm debating that. Or in the next modern text, I probably will look at the early modern text, modern writing. I may look at probably Rousseau. I'm thinking Rousseau's social contract. And that's the basic structure of what I'm going to be doing videos, right? And maybe you want to put your recommendations here. And this is the time I'm going to say, you can subscribe, trying to do something. If you have not subscribed, get your friends, share it, ask it, and put in comments what you would like to see done in that sense. And, of course, I'm not going to, some modern texts I'm not going to do. I'm sorry. It's just, I've been trying to, it's very difficult to even structurally look. I've been trying to really, And I've read it many times, and I've tried to think about it. Burnham's Manager Revolution, and I thought, oh my God, you can't. This is if I thought the problem of if you thought the problem of Montesquieu's with this next thing on that 4-hour chapter, my God, I may do it in eventual time. I have to think about it because I haven't found a good edition online that I can put on Google. I have to go find it, and um, the old edition is not really that good to post on things because it just looks very bad. And even the scans of it look very bad. So that's the structure. That's number 3 on. It's but it's 2 and 3. I've been doing these things, right? What I've been doing over the past week, I told you what I did. I was writing. I finished writing some things, and I did my teaching schedule, and what I've been reading and reflections. And now leading to our last thing, and I think the reflections of 2 concerns that I've had because of reading and writing. One is as I wait for the editor to get paid. Apparently, the university sent the thing about before I came on my just before coming on the vacation on my trip on Tuesday, previous Tuesday. The university sent it, so it takes usually 10 days, 5 to 10 days to do a wire transaction. They have not notified me of that they received it, the editor in America. And I'm waiting for, and maybe a week later, I will get back the sun clouds outside. I'll get back the notification with the corrected paper, and I'll send it to some journals and publication. And as with the big revelation this past week was the new edition of the Polish Ministry list of journals, which all of a sudden had a couple journals shift from being only 70 points to 100 points, 140 points. Oh my God. So it's like, oh God. But the international journals didn't change. So I was surprising, hoping that the international journals, some of the international I looked at would get more points, but no, that didn't happen. Instead, what happened was that some Polish journals got up points, and it became journals that I kind of didn't think about applying for. Now I might have to kind of opportunistically apply for the purposes of professional point development, right? The laugh of modern science, so a scientist. So okay, that explains a lot of things. But again, we're doing this. I've been finishing my paper in book 5 of the politics, which now the paper I just turned is book 4, chapter 11, about the riddle of the mesos, and the question of the importance of the mesos for Aristotle and why this is so, and that's the question of stability and political stability of the mesos, and I was also trying to respond to, maybe this is something I was kind of responding also to the way in modern understanding of Aristotle, the role of Martin Simmerd Lipsitz's famous 5960 article on the the economic consequences of democracy, so some socioeconomic consequence. I forget the exact name. I'm going to have to go there. And it's also called middle class hypothesis. And his middle class is complete. And actually, the argument is that when people talk about the middle class or the mesos in Aristotle, they often understand it in light of what, following in the 20th century, following the right in the later half of the past 30, 40 years, 50 years, was particularly in Anglo-American scholarship, it was very Lipsitz's claim was framed as an Aristotelian claim, and that therefore this kind of confusion of the Lipsitzian sociological understanding was imposed on Aristotle. And that was that paper, and that's the one I'm waiting the editor to kind of start and kind of clean up so I can get it into a better publisher. But the book 5 thing I'm still working on. I have to go relook at my 2 chapters I've written on book 5, big chapters. And I have this small little 3-part chapter, this book 4, and that chapter 4 of book 5, which is kind of I separated. Originally, I had book 1 through 4, chapters 1 through 4 as one piece, but I realized it was too long and that I needed to remove chapter 4 and just do 1 to 3. And even some people argue 1 to 3 is too long. In fact, when we given the book, I mentioned that the reviewer sent me comments of the thing of a journal I kind of now wish I didn't send it to because I knew it was going to get nitpicked to death. Given this kind of, it would have been better just to get for them to say no quickly, but you get feedback. You got feedback for one time, a useful feedback. Well, useful and not useful because basically what they want you, the guy wanted me to kind of rewrite. I can see his points, but if I do the points, then it's no longer it's no longer a doable paper in that sense. It becomes a bigger monster. Well, it's always going to be a bigger monster. This is what led to me to kind of separate why I'm not going to. The one book on Aristotle's regime change is not going to be two books in that because of that. But I need some papers. So I looked at I kind of quickly reread my notes in something two drafts. I've drafted of the 4 parts of their. I kind of drafting, like I said, rethinking of the 4 parts. And the 4 parts of book 4 is kind of reflection. Chapter 4, book 5 is kind of a weird thing because where we end on the kind of the third criteria of efficient causes of political change, of metabole. This term change, metabole, it is this way. It's often translated in translations as revolution, but it's not revolution because it's metabole is the concept word for change in the physics. So let's translate. This is political change, right? And that while revolution is a form of political, the most extreme political change, but not all political change is revolution. And the question of change is for the good or for the ill. And most of the idea is that most change seems to be for the ill, or destructions of regimes, or the transformation of a regime from one either full type, class type or even maybe the subvariety of types from one to another, and what are the causes for this. And Aristotle comes up in his book, chapters 1 through 3 of book 5, a general theory, which I've talked about. I think, I did a video. I'm not sure if I did a video, but I've done the video. I did the whole politics series. Maybe I should do the video of that again to talk about that. So let's go look at this question of this 4th chapter of book 5, which is kind of him going in more detail of some issues that have not been that have been either addressed or implied of the general theory of change, right? And there's 4. One is that his need to talk about small things, which was kind of one of the 11 categories of efficient cause. Now, this is the debate of my reader, and the reader that read my paper said, well, but some of these are both of final and no. I argue that, yes, that some of these echo up to the earlier thing, like honor and pride, but this is specific cases, and therefore he's dealing in. This is that point, that this is why it's a very complicated thing. He reuses some themes from the previous ideas of honor and profit loss, and honor, dishonor, profit loss, but now using it in a specific sense, so that these are therefore then. They're saying, well, that's the general count. No, it's not. And this is what I got furious with them. I think it's a misunderstanding. These commenters, this editor is pointing to people, these commenters who collapse these two and thinks that the account, because it has the same theme, it is the same theme. But no, it's that product is both at a level of this and a level of that of a final, well, not a final, but final one is this is the final. This is the teleological cause, and the triggering, or I say the efficient or the pudding cause, right? From Aristotle's 4 causalities, and now he finds it necessary to readdress small things in detail. Okay, so I have written a section. It's about 6 or 8 pages now, and I have to go read it. But I haven't done it. I turned to the last thing. Okay, these 4 sections. One is small things. Another problem is how the growth of the Politeuma. The Politeuma is the ruling party, the body who rules the regime, who gives the regime. And that's the famous line that the regime is that thing that gives form to the polis, the political community. people are coming back, and Earth finishes up. Um, um, so, in other words, the regime, the politeia, the regime, gives the form to the political body, but the plutuma is that part within the regime that is the authoritative part. So it's that which it is the governing part. Remember, everything is the political community is a discrete body, as we talked about before, not a holistic body. So it's the structure of the form and the institutions that are created like this. The ruling part is that part, that part of the city, that group or class or group, who are the ones who hold the deciding authoritative decisions in that. And therefore, what happens if you change that? The growth of the Politeuma, he says, causes a change in regime. Now, this is in fact, this is, and then the last thing is sudden change in the size of the political community. That part, in other words, a sudden change, that a part of the community changes and change. Right? That's another thing of. Therefore, he addresses 2 or 3 triggers, small things, growth of the Politeuma, and the sudden change of this. All of a sudden, as kind of themes that are kind of need to be expanded on a little bit. Now, small things gets a big treatment. Honestly, the growth of Politeuma and the change of this, I might separate them because right now I keep them as one, and I think they're more work together as one question. This is the question of size and sudden change of things, or the change, how this is that the Politeuma changes by the growth of it. It therefore changes its character of the ruling body, and therefore by changing the character, you may even change the kind of regime it is. Suddenly, the same thing is a part of the city, that all of a sudden the dynamic of the city, one part grows and it becomes too big and it causes a problem to the city. It changes the balance of structures. Therefore, that does a thing. And then last thing is, this is the fourth part. And this is the one I kind of spent like this week on a little bit, was for this weird discussion. The very end of this general discussion, his review of kind of themes that I have to highlight, he introduces something that really he's never introduced in the whole politics. That is decision making, of the way of decision making, and the idea of, he says that, well, okay, I'm going to introduce change. A person's going to introduce change, and policies to change. So therefore, these things, to understand what causes change, are going to be actions and policies of a political leader, of a politicos, of the political actors. Maybe those who are part of the Politeuma, but also those within the society or the political community who are outside the Politeuma, who can influence or do things that cause actions and affect change, or by outside forces. Okay, these are the different things. These are the actors of this. Now, when the making of law and making of a policy, this is a double internal situation, and therefore the twofold. That is the question of how you make it. Now, Aristotle says, well, there's 2 points. There's the beginning, when you do it, the initial. The creation of a policy or an action, the initiation of it, how it's presented, how it's sold, and how it's told, and then it's in the middle of it, or that when it has to be continued or preserved, how do you respond? And he comes up with this idea of, and it's very fun. He focuses on force and fraud, or force and fraud, between coercion and deceit, as this question. But then it's always implied in it, is this background of it is also persuasion. So the threefold characteristics. And therefore you get this, everything can be either, and there's a kind of equation here that of course it's best to persuade, but in force, if you have to do force or fraud is better than fraud is, though it's deceptive and it's unjust, but it's better than mere force. So you have this kind of equation of this, and then you have the dimensions of it. So therefore you have a double. You have a dimensions of what strategies are doing it. If you can either do it by force, and then you can maintain it by force or coercion, of force or deception or persuasion, Or you can start, in other words, you start each category, and then each category has another dimension. And therefore, this constant interplay of this and how you defend or justify or legitimize or continual policy and the connections. And this is the engine. This explains the dynamic by which change happens, or preservation and change. Preservation and change happens in the regime in that sense, and how this dimension. And therefore, it's only a very end and very paragraph. It's not like, oh my God, this is not like a big thing, but it is the big thing. It's something that really has not been explicitly addressed anywhere. Maybe in the rhetoric a little bit, there's a discussion about deliberation and the way, of course, we always turn to the ethics of the question of deliberation. But deliberation there is only choice in the question of this. He never deals with the question of course, we say, of course, he's discussed coercion in the discussion of mastery in book 1, but never in terms of the dimension of what the difference between political force done for a political reason versus force done for the interest of the master, right? Remember, always you have to understand that the dimension of justice in the Aristotelian framework is that why something is being done. Is it being done for the sake of the community, for everyone's benefit and good? That's just. Decisions are being made or policies being done or executed. Now that's the goal, right? The goal of the policy. What is the policy trying to accomplish in that sense? Even its accomplishment, what it delivers. But the means by which you deliver it, this is what is being talked about. And I think this is the means. That therefore you can have the situation of a good policy or a bad policy, but it could be a bad policy persuaded through good means, or a good policy pursued by less good means. It'd be preferable that in a free city, it's preferable you rule by persuasion, not through coercion. But what happens if the people don't want to do the thing that's for their advantage? They're unwilling. Then you must it'd be preferred to use deceit, but then you might have to, what happens when they discover the deceit and they react to it? Then you have to use force, right? These are the models we have to think of, a political actor needs to address. And also this explains how change and stasis can emerge even when a ruler is actually ruling for what is beneficial or good. So therefore, this is the whole issue about this. And I think this last thing, this thing at the end of chapter 4, is actually bigger. It's a kind of like mind-blowing. It forces you. This is an example of Aristotle. Aristotle is really not giving us a complete thing here. He's giving us problems and issues that we have to think through as a thinker, and that's why that's in my article so far. It's something I might have to write it through. I posted it on my academic social media link and my research group, and on academic.edl about, get some feedback. I'm not going to get feedback. I rarely ever do, or useful feedback. Now, this leads us to the thing I was talking with my friend in America, who I finally heard from, because he went to go to Canada to do something, and coming back to his school, we wrote a paper together, and it's, on forms of rule. And I'm ending on this point. We're looking at the questions of forms of rule. And I'm really thinking about this. This is a question I've been really concerned with. I think what led me to kind of rethink of maybe doing it, I've always thought about doing it again. In fact, maybe even do a mini book with him on the question of the forms of rule. I think our little paper we did was a good introduction to it. But I've now looked at, some questions, and the questions I have it emerged also with my reading of Kojève on notion of authority, where I kind of took issue with Kojève on love. And that is also because I think, I agree with Schmidt. The enemy is an important dimension of the political, but it's not. And I think even Schmidt would understand that. I think people overread Schmidt's discussion of the enemy, because I think the enemy is important for this idea of the purposes of what he says, the crisis of that thing. But friends are important too. And he even in the concept of the political makes points about that. The only problem is that Schmidt really overemphasizes the enemy and fails to address the friend. And this is why I'm almost wanting to go do quickly looking at book one of the politics of the threefold claims of justice that the book one addresses, the incomplete forms of this, right? Which anyone who talks about enemy, discussion of the enemy is this horrible proto-Nazi Schmidt. No, it's with the Greek philosophy. You see this in all Greek tragedy, Greek drama, all Greek political thing. It is the the question of friends and enemies is the fundamental political question in the Greek understanding. So what have I been doing? Well, this is the book I didn't talk about. I've been thinking about the question of, one of the things of the political forms I dealt with was, economics, which is, the question of master slave, mastery. Again, this echoes some of the things. The master situation is the rule of over slaves, despotic rule. This is the situation where, go back to my videos on this. I talk about this in one of my early videos many years ago about the four forms of rule in this sense, and that mastery is where the ruler is benefited and the ruled is not benefited. It serves the rule serves the benefit of the masters, right? That's slavery, right? That's not who benefits the masters. The ruler benefits. The rule doesn't. The rule serves the ruled, right? Paternal care. Well, paternal care, love, of the fathers the fathers or parents is that who benefits the children. So it's the ruled benefits while the rulers serve. Then there is what we call economic rule, which is there is not rule per se, but this is only that people are ruled for the sake of their interest of the trade, that both must win. Therefore, this is not coercion. Whereas mastery is both coercion, but mastery and paternal care mastery always involves coercion. Paternal care also doesn't necessarily totally always coercion, but there is coercion in paternal care. Mastery is always coercion, right? The coercion emerges in paternal care when the children is unwilling to do what the parent tells them to do because they don't understand, and usually that is due to their lack of understanding. Right? This idea that they don't have the reasoning and judgment ability to understand what their good is, or maybe they don't have the good character to be the good. That's the other thing. This is this idea that the parent wishes to force the good on them. This leads us to the political, which is kind of unlike economics. It does involve coercion. It's like paternal care. This intersection between paternal, this is the thing about this, and that the deficiency of political life, when political life is properly done, it's more towards paternal care. But when it's unjustly done, it becomes more despotic, right? That's the whole point. This is when it's unjust. When political rule turns towards unjust, when it's ruled for the sake of the rulers or particular interest at the expense of everyone's interest, the common interest, right? This becomes unjust. And this leads us to the question of, these four themes shaping it. Now, this leads us to my point of love and friendship, right? This is this idea why my little objection with Kojève. Kojève doesn't think love is kind of or useful as a basis of authority. And it's also because he doesn't understand that violence, coercion, or fear of it can be used as a force of thing. And I think this is in other words, he reduces everything to this existential willing agency. And I'm going to go, we're at the hour point and I'm going to end this soon, but this is the point where I'm going to start to say, no, it's about, hate to say it, this is where I will turn to him. Yes, fear is that thing, but I want to look at love and fear. I'm going to be looking at love and fear. And I think that's the thing. Love and fear is going to be the thing. I'm going to first start with my friend. We're going to be looking at love and the four dimensions of love following from this. This is C.S. Lewis's famous The Four Loves. I think it's it's a book for a general audience. Well, this is a serious book. Well, it's a, and isn't this what real? No, it's about also he addresses themes of this, and I think he looks at the four things. He talks about the introduction to the thing and the famous chapters of liking and love, liking and loves for the subhuman, which means things, right? How we have attachment. And this also love of our pets, love of our things, but also love of our country, right? This is an interesting theme in his concept of what is this meant. And then from that point on, he goes into the four types of love. That is affection, friendship. So affection, storge, friendship, philia, right? Eros, right? Erotic love. And then he says charity. Of course, he's going to be a good medievalist. He's putting the Latin caritas, right? But the Greek word is agape. And one of the things I want to look at is this leads us to famous Hannah Arendt's dissertation on Augustine on love. I might look at. I've read it a long time ago, and it's an interesting book. When it first came out, I was like, oh my God, this is pretty good. When it first came out in an English translation, I think, and I also understand. Jean Beth Elstein had a book on the question of this. I think she was interested in Arendt on love also, because I think this is the medieval Christian understanding of rule. This takes us to Augustine, right? This takes us to Augustine's understanding of what is the purpose of rulership and God's love. In other words, God is the matter. If the sovereignty is an understanding, if Hobbes' understanding of sovereignty rests on a kind of taking the characteristics of the divine, and this is that famous argument, right? That Schmidt argues that all understandings of modern politics is basically appropriations from the theological, right? It's taking the attributes of God. The modern state takes the attributes of God and turns it into a mortal God. That's Hobbes' Leviathan. That's the beginning of the whole point, right? This is why sovereignty, the concept of sovereignty, comes from the divine power of the crisis of the Reformation and leads us to the discussion of the question of predestination and freedom of the will and all these discussions that really drove a lot of the debates of the reformers and the critics of the reformers. Energizes political thinking in this sense. And therefore the question of love and looking at it in its four dimensions of affection. And this is, I think we can even argue that this is the way that we can say patriotism operates at a level of affections for fellow citizenship, right? This affection, fellow feeling and affection. And this is why without affection, there cannot be community, right? And then friendship is next. This is the next level. That friendship is a stronger bond. So therefore this leads us erotic, and this is the erotic, of course, leads us to the question of children, right? The questions of the future, right? The possibility of offspring. Yes, the erotic is not a long-term situation, but it energizes the need to people to meet and procreate. And therefore we get the idea of, and also we have to understand the erotic in terms of its role in philosophy. Also, that's important. Yeah, the desire to know, that's the whole nature of philosophy, the love of wisdom, right? It's phila, love, right? But this is, when you say friendship, why not erologia, right? If we understand this. But no, philosophia, wisdom. And that where he leads us to this theme. And then caritas, agape, right? The caring, this real care of sacrificial care of the divine, this idea that the sacrifice of the Father, I think maybe this is where I think Kojève kind of gets it right about the Father. I think his understanding of and why the modern world hates the Father in this sense. I think this is a very good point, but he misses the reasoning for this. It's the Father is the agape, it is the caring, it is the love. And this is the love and the role of love in terms of the idea of, in fact, this is the medieval construction of the king, right? The king is a sacrificial entity, like Christ, right? This is why Christ as king as God Christ, like, and the idea of this shepherd, right? The shepherd, all the Christian imagery of Christ is also given to the concept of the Davidic crown. Also, this is the Old Testament as well. You see this idea of Christ as king and the king as Christ, and the king as a servant of God, and also God becoming that, right? This is the Christian conception of this. And this is the idea that the sacrificial character of kingship or fatherhood can only, that the human will always be imperfect in this conception, in that it can never demand it, because we humans you cannot demand the constant sacrifice that such a love would demand. Only a God, only something perfect, and this is why that God has to become man in order to deliver the peak of that perfection, the incarnation argument. And I think this really shapes the conception of the Middle Ages, of how it understood. This is why monarchy was the principal dark. This is why monarchy and not political rule was the thing, because this overemphasis on this agape and love as the foundations for rule. And this is why it is one. It is and it's tied to kingship, and this is the limit. And I think this is why the whole debate of Book 3 is worth looking at. Book 3 of Aristotle's Politics. At the end, the last part, the debate between absolute monarchy, Pambasileia, and law, the rule of law, is worth thinking about, because that while, yes, Pambasileia is the best, but it's not perpetuable, and it's difficult. And I even have a line about that, a footnote in that in my 2004 LSU book about that, is that you just think of the problem of Mordred and King Arthur, right? That the Arthur is this great king, but it's his son. Mordred is not. It'll be his undoing, right? But the father cannot redress the son, cannot abandon the son. It's unnatural. It's unacceptable, and that therefore this is why the political situation is the idea of problem of perpetuation of this karatas. It's too much. It's too much. It demands too much of human beings. One, two, that it is too risky on chance, and it may occur, but it's not something that can easily perpetuated, and it can maybe it wouldn't be prudent to believe it could be perpetuated. We see that even in the biblical story, right? After David's the greatest king, right, Solomon. But then what happens with Solomon after Solomon brings the greatest destruction? It's the great wise Solomon. Causes the greatest, ultimate greatest harm to befall his people, right? And therefore they're divided, they're split, and the kings from that point on are evil kings, right? That leads to the destruction of both Israel and Judah, right? And maybe not Judah, but Israel. Therefore, you get this fundamental, until the restoration after the capture by the so-called Babylonian captivity, and then Cyrus's great empire, the Persian Empire, frees the restore the king. Again, if you know your scripture, your account of the Old Testament, you would understand this understanding of the way the kingship under metaphor is understood in this sense. And the theological understanding of kingship is tied to love, the Father's love. And agape here is tied to this, the God's love, right? God's paternal care and the sacrificial care in that sense. This is the image of why the shepherd, right? The shepherd. And that leads us to that famous line in the Plato, right? What is the job of the question of each man is one art, but the problem is, what is the shepherd's art? Well, the shepherd has to care the animals. Well, he's going to have to sell them, right? Well, that's a different thing, right? The one man, one art argument in Plato, right? this later chapter, but the question of what is the art practiced by the shepherd and the king? What is the political art? Is it a single art or is it multiple art? Well, this is where I like to leave off our discussion. So if you have any comments or questions or things that you want us to discuss at these future ones, please put it below. Any recommendations or suggestions to take not only for these special Friday events, but also for future videos to address, please put them below. If you like it, share it with a friend. If you didn't like it, say no, but say why. It helps. Maybe we can learn and improve. Again, this is not live, so apologize for that, but we'll try to do live. Another thing you can do is if you want to help, first, you can follow me on social media below. If you want to help me do what I do, you can do so. Subscribe to our Patreon, which of course there's no one there right now. I mean, I'm doing this still. I'm not that, because you're giving everything away for free. What are you doing for us? Maybe it's not that. Again, I think I'm too small of a channel, and there's only, like I say, only about 20 people, 30 people, 40 people. Maybe these videos get about me higher things, but at the initial release, people don't really go into it that much because I'm, because it's too technical and we're out of school and vacation and maybe, okay, whatever. Another way you can do it is you can link at my books links below. Also, I added a new thing here is my background, who I am. So therefore, there's the academic social media links as well. So my normal social media links, the academic social media links, and then you can talk about Patreon, subscribe star, and the books I have, my books you want to help me to buy. Well, that's it. Well, take care. Have a good Friday. Have a good weekend. See you later. See you again on Mondays and Wednesdays. We continue. You guys will continue Montesquieu, and then Thursday, Fridays you'll keep on doing Schmidt. Okay. Take care. Bye bye. Have a good weekend.